Chapter 14. Clues. Dan and Brad shared the opinion of the other cubs that their fun times were nearly at an end at the castle. Parting company with the other boys, they discussed the matter as they walked towards their homes. "I'll bet a cent Mr. Keene won't allow us to go poking around in the woods," Brad remarked. "I especially wanted to see if we could find any cause as to how the fire started." "Why don't we go out there now, by ourselves?" "I'd like to," Brad replied. "I sure would, but it wouldn't be cricket. Mr. Keene takes it for granted we'll only go there when he's around to watch us." "I guess you're right," Dan admitted ruefully. "What we could do, though, is get there early on Saturday. If we're lucky, we might get an hour's jump on Mr. Keene." During the next few days, the cubs made what arrangements they could for costumes. The mothers of the two dens came through splendidly, fashioning garments out of whatever material they had on hand. On the whole, the cubs felt that the play would not be quite the flop they had feared. Nevertheless, resentment flared again when Ross displayed the elegant costume he had purchased at the theatrical supply store. Among some of the boys, it was whispered that Ross still expected to be awarded the star role in the play. And though Dan and Brad tried to quiet such rumblings, the cubs continued to hint that he might have had something to do with starting the disastrous fire. "If Ross is innocent, the cubs are doing him a terrible injustice," Brad said to his friends early Saturday. The two boys had walked to the castle grounds and by intention were there ahead of the pack. "I wish we could find how the fire really started," Dan replied soberly. "So much time has elapsed now, all clues probably have been destroyed." "We may find some more of those arrows, Dan. They may or may not have significance." The two boys were hopeful of coming upon evidence to indicate that the fire had been accidentally started or had been started by a mysterious ghost of the castle. Their task proved most discouraging. As they wandered through the black and charred area, they found not a single clue. They did not observe that the damage to the shrubs and trees had been relatively slight. "It looks to me as if Ross told the truth about cleaning up the brush," Brad declared, pausing beside a large pile of charred sticks and debris. "See, he must have gathered it all here in this one place. And maybe touched a match to it? Ross wouldn't be that stupid. He knows better than to start a fire in a wooded area. Anyway, you can see the fire didn't start in this pile of brush. It spread from some distance back." Dan agreed with his friend's observation. Both could see where the fire had followed the line of least resistance along the winding road. "Say, I wonder where that road leads," Dan speculated. "I never noticed it here before." Curious to learn whether or not it joined the main road, they followed it for a short distance. Before the boys had gone far, they discovered that it twisted in amongst the trees leading behind the castle. From there it swung to the right, presently coming out within view of the adjoining estate. By this time, the cubs had learned that the property was owned by a Colonel Breckenridge. "No sense going any further," Brad said, halting. "For all we know, we may be trespassing on Breckenridge land. If the Colonel's gardener should spot us, he'd make trouble." "The road hasn't been used much of late," Dan said, noting that it was clogged with grass. Pausing in a clearing, the boys gazed towards the pillared Breckenridge home. No one was to be seen either in the yard or on the veranda. After a casual inspection, the pair started back the way they had come. They had covered about 2/3 the distance to the castle when Dan abruptly halted to study a charred, irregular area at the side of the road. "Say, it looks as if someone had a campfire here," he exclaimed. "Recently, too, because rains haven't disturbed any of the ashes." Brad turned to gaze at the area his companion indicated. Immediately he noticed a snake-like black trail of burned ground leading towards another charred area. Dan, this must be where the fire started, he cried. The wind was blowing towards the castle, all right. It's clear as a day, Brad declared, walking over to the dead ashes of the bonfire. Someone built this and didn't put it out entirely, and then the person went off. And it slowly spread, Dan agreed. First in this narrow trail, and then after it struck that section of dry leaves and grass, it spread out rapidly through the woods. The boys carefully examined the dead embers. Beside them was a blackened tin can which had been used for cooking purposes. Dan also picked up a half-burned stick with the remains of a roasted wiener still attached. This fire must have been started by a boy, he said slowly, or possibly by a tramp. Brad, do you suppose it could have been Ross? He wouldn't build a fire as carelessly as this, the den chief pointed out. He's had cub training in how to lay his sticks. No, I'm more than ever convinced, Dan, that the fire wasn't his fault. Decidedly relieved to think that they had found evidence which tended to exonerate Ross, the two cubs traced the start of the fire. Plainly, they would see where it had leapt over the narrow ditch and then moved in several directions. If Ross didn't start the fire, who did? Dan speculated as the boys started down the road again. Our mysterious ghost of the castle? Could be. I'd like to catch that guy who keeps horning into our pictures. Maybe we will, too. Any ideas? Dan asked. Before Brad could reply, both boys were startled to hear a babbling of voices ahead of the trail. Sounds like a delegation, Brad murmured. I wonder if the cubs have arrived for rehearsal. Rounding a bend of the road, the two boys caught a glimpse of 4 Den 2 boys who had gathered in a huddle. Their backs were to Dan and Brad. So earnestly were they talking that they failed to observe the approach of the other 2 cubs. Mr. Hatfield can't and won't do anything, Dan and Brad heard Red say distinctly. We all know Ross is guilty, so it's up to us to see that he's punished. Sure, and let's think up a good one too, proposed Chips. We've got to teach that little guy a lesson he won't forget. Da-do-da-do.